Hey, welcome back. Government continues to overspend. The audit outcomes for the 2019-2020 financial year painted a bleak picture. Although there's some improvement, there was still over 50 billion rand in irregular expenditure. And state-owned enterprises remain a concern for the Auditor General, Tsakani Maluleke, who joins me now for a conversation on the audit outcomes. AG, you were at pains to highlight that you might look at the figure for 2018-2019 in terms of irregular expenditure being 66.9 billion rand and compare it with 54 billion rand of 2019-2020 and think, well, at least things are improving. But you were at pains to say, actually, it's a slight improvement, but it's nothing to celebrate. Why is that?
Good morning to Lesizwe, and I'm so pleased to be on this platform, and good morning to the viewers at home. Indeed, credit where it's due. There is some improvement. What we were saying around not being complacent, around celebrating the reduction in the reported irregular expenditure number, is that one, that number is likely to be incomplete because a number of auditees had uncertainty about the completeness of the irregular expenditure that they had incurred. Two, whilst there are slight improvements in different aspects, whether you're looking at improvements in the provinces, which are notable, whether you're looking at improvements in the increase of clean audits, the decrease of disclaimer audit opinions, what is of concern to us is that we're not yet seeing evidence of sustainable change. And that's got to be the focus of all of us who care about South Africa and its public finances. So that's the message that we were sending out, that let's not be so quick to celebrate what may appear on the surface to be an improvement, because the moment demands that we all be seized with building institutions that are going to be characterized by proper discipline, strong controls to prevent irregularities, to detect them when they happen, and to act, because things sometimes do go wrong. The question is whether there is speed and decisiveness in dealing with things that do go wrong. And what we are worried about is we are not seeing that evidence that there is a clear, decisive set of actions by the widespread number of people doing work across government.
So what you're saying then is the figure is actually likely to be higher because I think I heard you say that there are instances where some of the auditees in the form of national and provincial governments as well as state-owned entities could not really back up some of the figures that they have for irregular expenditure and could likely have understated that. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but also more concerningly, you then took that figure of irregular expenditure and tallied it up over the last few years, and it comes up to about 250 billion rand.
Yes, we show that figure because it's another indication that we're not yet dealing with matters that are proven to be irregular at the end of each audit year. And what that indicates is that there is still a culture of tolerating transgressions. Because, Tulasizwe, if you find an irregularity and then you don't act on it, what then happens is people get used to the notion that there'll never be consequences, right? And so you start to have a culture where people get away with stuff, the expectation of getting away with stuff, and then you end up with even worse transgressions than where you first began. And the expenditure framework around how you deal with irregular expenditure, as well as the PFMA, requires that accounting officers, so that would be the Directors General or the heads of department, it also requires that the boards of public entities be seized with acting when there's been an irregularity. And what they're supposed to do is, first of all, investigate what's really gone on. And once they've done that, complete that investigation quickly. But once it's done, they're supposed to either stop the leakage, or whether they cancel a contract, they stop the spending, they recover the lost funds, report matters to law enforcement where that becomes an indication that that must happen. And they should discipline people that in their own environments have done something wrong. And then the last thing is fix whatever control has proven to have been defective and therefore leading to the irregularity. If we see more of that discipline where people deal with irregular expenditure that's being reported, then we'll start to create a culture where there's much less tolerance for transgressions or even just poor performance.
So let me ask one last question along this line, ma'am, because I did build this interview as in part being about, talking about the contents of your report, but also for South Africans to just get to know you a bit better, having assumed office in December 2020. So the last question along this line, the Public Audit Act that's been amended gives you widespread powers, particularly around issues of material irregularities. There's an example you used yesterday, ma'am, that I thought was quite apt. Many of us think that when we talk about money being wasted and not being spent properly and resources not being looked after, we think corruption and people just doling out cash for goods that they sometimes don't receive, which does happen. But there's an example you used of a grader, what they call yellow plant, that you're saying was left at someone's home with the keys inside, and by the time it was detected, you tell the story, how that fits in with material irregularities.
Absolutely, Dula Sizwe. So the material irregularity concept essentially says to the Auditor General, once you've identified irregular expenditure, yes, report on it, but we'd like you to go and inspect whether or not there's been financial loss or whether there's been harm to an institution or to the public. But look a bit deeper so that you can help the accounting officer pinpoint the key things that need urgent attention so that they can go and recover the resources that are being lost. And so when we've been implementing these powers, and we've been doing so for the last 2 years, and we've been doing it with the rigor that South Africans have come to expect out of the National Audit Office, what we found is that the key problems arise out of the same areas that we've been raising as key weaknesses in terms of how resources are being managed. Things about procurement, things about expenditure management, and in this instance, we were talking about the safeguarding of assets. So the example is this. In a particular community, in this department and in one of the provinces, a grader was left at the home of one of the community members, not at the premises that it should be, not at the official premises. But worse still, this grader was left with the keys inside. And the grader was then lost. Somebody came in and drove off with it. By the time it was discovered that this grader was missing, which was a few days or a few weeks later, the thing had crossed the border. So the grader was no longer in the borders of South Africa. And what we are raising is, yes, the plant would have been worth 1.5 million rand, but the impact on the ability to deliver services is much greater because it's going to take a much longer period to actually replace the grader. And we also use the example to pinpoint that we're not asking for complex stuff. This is not difficult to do. Build preventative controls that will make sure that graders are not left with the keys inside, and make sure that you have a system to quickly detect whether or not you're losing assets so that you can safeguard them by recovering them quickly and not wait until they've left the borders of South Africa, and then your chances of recovering this grader are then much greatly diminished.
And I think it's the apt example because you can directly draw a line between failure to safeguard that asset and a community being frustrated in that the roads are not being maintained. And there are many, many other examples that you could have used. But let's turn to you now, Tsakani Maluleke. From Soshanguve, born and raised in Soshanguve, well, in different parts of the country. I'm told that you are actually an accidental auditor. Your intention was to go into the law profession, but your late father, George Maluleke, who was very influential in your life, steered you in this direction.
Yes, this is true. So I often talk about how I'm quite the daddy's girl and always was. And I so admired him. And I suppose because he was so active in the development of the legal profession, drove the entry and advancement of many black men and women who wanted to advance in the legal profession. And we saw him do this in a voluntary capacity, such that he had such passion for the profession. All of that inspired me to want to follow in his footsteps. Not only was he the consummate professional in terms of the excellence with which he did his work, but he cared for his community and made sure that others advanced. And so I looked to do the same. And at the time that I was leaving high school, and I suppose many parents have this debate with their children, I was now wanting to go and apply to universities. And I said, look, I'm going to study the law, and I want to go and register for a BA and do my LLB. And my plan is clear, right? I thought I might even emerge as the Minister of Justice one day. So he said to me, look, you know, the world is changing, and there are many opportunities opening up for younger auditors, younger attorneys and younger lawyers in the commercial space. So go do a BCom, and then you can do your LLB. And it was really just about obedience, right? And I didn't want to fight with this man, so off I went to university and did my BCom. And at that point, I discovered in a great level of detail the accountancy profession. And I did vacation work at the end of my first year at university. And at one of the firms, I met someone who said to me that there were hardly any black people in the profession. And when I inquired why, it was unclear to me why there were these barriers being put and these suggestions that it was difficult for black people to enter the profession. So I kind of just decided, well, I'm going to do it for no other reason than it was just a challenge, and I wanted to disprove the notion that there were limitations to what black people could do. So that's how I entered the profession, and I'm glad I've enjoyed my time in the profession, and I'm glad that I'm here at this time. So I suppose destiny will catch you somehow.
So with that background, now that we know a bit more about you, what do you bring to the Office of the Auditor General? I mean, I saw a few people responding when you were delivering your comments yesterday in your report that said, oh, Tsakani Maluleke is lamenting the exact same things that Kimi Makwetu before her was lamenting. What about you do you hope will leave an imprint in that Office of Auditor General? Or rather, what targets have you set for yourself around that office and the work that it does for our democratic hygiene?
You know, I've worked in the office for 8 years now, and all of that time I worked alongside the late A.G. Makwetu. And so many of his passions, many of the things he was driving, I was working actively with him on. So I so believe in what the office has done over time. And I understand that my principal job is to maintain the capacity, the capabilities, and the reputation of an office, which is one that delivers on its mandate without fear, without prejudice, and with rigor. And so that's the one thing I understand I must ensure I do. And if I do that, I think I would have achieved a great deal. However, when I look at the office, I'm taken by the notion that we could be even more relevant than what we are today. And the moment in South Africa right now, I think the world over, but many countries are starting to accept that nobody is coming to save any country. It's absolutely imperative that all players in society, citizens, business, government, and independent institutions be seized with this notion that we're all in this thing together. We've got to create a world where there's greater transparency, there's greater accountability, and there are improved levels of trust between citizens and the institutions that have been designed to serve them. That's my passion. And I think I can certainly build on the legacy left by previous Auditors General, maintaining what I found, and build on it so that we drive the office towards greater relevance.
Lastly,
my real ambition is to make sure that the essence of the work that we do rings true to the lived experiences of South Africans.
Lastly, the legislators have given you teeth with which to bite. Can we expect you to start biting soon? I mean, I saw that, for instance, around these, material irregularities in the work that you've done, by February this year, you had picked up 75. And I understand the explanation you give, that you've seen that when you talk to accounting officers, the people who are meant to account and follow up on what you pick up in the work that you do in your audits, there seems to be a culture, or a nascent culture, of people starting to fix whatever it is that you flag. But I suggest to you that in South Africa you're going to have to bite. You're going to have to use those teeth that the legislators have given you. How soon can we expect to see Tsakani Maluleke, starting to bite, and are you ready for the backlash that is likely to come once you start doing that?
I can guarantee you that my colleagues and I are so dedicated to implement this instrument that we've been trusted with. We will make sure that we never hesitate to act on issuing remedial action or a certificate of debt should that moment arise. And we are in the second year of implementing this instrument. We've, for the first time, implemented it across a large number of auditees, and we are now following up on whether or not accounting officers are taking the appropriate action. Where they do not, we simply will not hesitate, because we've understood the importance of this instrument in terms of how it can drive greater improvements in the levels of accountability within government. And am I ready for the backlash? We're an independent office. We're required to do this work. We take it seriously, and I have no intention of shunning my responsibilities to serve South Africans in the way that this instrument has been designed.
All right, thank you for that. That's Auditor General Tsakani Maluleke joining us for her first interview, I believe, here on eNCA since she was appointed and started her duties on the 1st of December 2020. Just reflecting on the audit outcomes for national and provincial governments. She hasn't even come back to us on what's happening in the municipalities. That Pandora's box is closed, at least for now. We know what it looks like, certainly, for all the years, but she's going to be revealing that a bit later on in the year and also telling us a bit more about herself. Tsakani Maluleke there.